Well, you're all okay. You're all very welcome to this meeting of the Workers' International Network. Our discussion today is of a general nature. It will focus inevitably on the UK, principally as a result of the good discussion we had last Tuesday around the campaign for a mass workers' party, at which discussion Eric Barnes himself spoke. The campaign for a mass workers' party, which is currently underway in the UK, is a relevant issue across the globe. Many countries which in the past had mass workers' parties, such as Italy, the Socialist Party is gone. In France, the Socialist Party has all but disappeared, even though Mélenchon and his coalition, new coalition, is now the dominant force on the left. The mass workers' party, as was the French Socialist Party, has gone. In the UK, the mass party of workers, which the Labour Party used to represent in terms of the union affiliation and involvement, has been betrayed by its present leaders, I should say, Keir Starmer and co. But before him, the rot had set in under people like Tony Blair. In Ireland, similarly, there is no workers' party, no mass workers' party. There's still a Labour Party, as there is in England. But the Irish Labour Party, in recent opinion polls, are polling around 4 to 6%, which is minimal for a country which is a modern industrialised economy where the majority of the population, the overwhelming majority, are working for a living and can be classified as workers. In the UK, the entire society is dominated by a couple of ultra wealthy billionaires. All the decisions that have been made in the US at the present time have been made in the interests of these billionaires. In fact, the recent suggestion that Trump and Musk might reconcile their differences is purely a consequence of the fall in the value of Musk's companies and Trump's fears that the collapse of Musk's companies will in turn affect the American economy. So the economic needs of the billionaires is deciding even things such as the row. And that row, by the way, is full of personal invective and insults on both sides. But nonetheless, they're prepared to shake hands and forget about it in the interests of the economy. So the need for a mass workers' party has never been more relevant. So we're happy today to introduce as our main speaker Eric Barnes, who represents the campaign for a mass workers' party in Britain. After Eric finishes his opening contribution, they've had plenty of time for discussion, and I'd encourage comrades to come back and forth in the discussion with a view to clarifying ideas rather than just stating positions and letting them sit there. So we look forward to a very open and very healthy discussion. So, Eric Barnes.
Thanks very much indeed, Chair, and good afternoon or good morning, everyone. Thanks very much for the invite to today's meeting, and although this is my first meeting, it definitely won't be my last, and I look forward to future debates with everyone. As the Chair's just said, I'm one of the people that have helped organise the recent meeting for the campaign for a mass workers' party, and I also made a short contribution at that meeting. I think, first of all, most of that is now available to see on the campaign for a mass workers' party website, YouTube account. So please do watch that when you get the opportunity. I think all the speakers are there now. Everyone that made a contribution will be uploaded soon, and the only speaker that's not there, Ken Loach, that's going to be added soon. So I think if it's helpful, I'll just give a quick overview of the meeting itself that was very well attended, just short, I believe, of 200 people. I'd like to thank, first of all, Roger, who stepped in as one of the chairs at very short notice for that meeting, because unfortunately the original chair, Dave Hill, could no longer attend due to health reasons, and we obviously wish Dave a full and speedy recovery. I think Roger opened the meeting by explaining that the aim of the campaign for a mass workers' party, it was to develop a united front of activists that were campaigning for the creation of a mass party based in the working class. He made it very clear from the onset that the meeting wasn't about people on the call trying to create a meeting. It was about pulling everyone together across, not just the UK, of course. Several comments were made about the international nature of what we're doing, which I'll come back to in a moment. So again, Roger set the scene for that meeting. where he explained that the Starmer-led Labour government had already been seen very quickly, even though it has not been in power yet for a year, for the Tory-like sham it is, with its attacks on ordinary people, whether it's via failing to remove legislation that discriminates against families with more than 2 children, the winter fuel allowance that he stopped for pensioners on a local level, through to the support for the genocide, what's going on in Gaza, and indeed his recent call. Starmer did a speech just last week, I think it was, where basically he said he's putting Britain on a war footing. And suddenly, when we're in an economy where the government is saying there is no money to keep pensioners warm, suddenly there's billions of pounds available for the arms manufacturers. So Roger set the scene there very nicely. And as the chair of this meeting has just said, he also mentioned what's going on in the USA and across the rest of the world, where there is the tide of the far right surging across the world. Roger used the word plague to describe it, which I thought was quite apt. But I think the next comment that Roger made opening the meeting that really struck me, where he was talking about nature abhors a vacuum and so does politics. And unfortunately, across the United Kingdom, because there's no longer a party that represents ordinary people, there is no party, mass party of the left. Unfortunately, Reform are starting to fill that vacuum that we'll come back to later. So there was a number of speakers, and I'll just go through them really in the order that people spoke, because every speaker was important. One of the comrades that spoke that may well have been on one of these calls before was Jabu Nalu Hartley. Jabu actually phoned in from South Africa, where she was visiting, and she was talking about some of the things that are going on in South Africa at the moment, where unfortunately a student in I think it was a university, had been shot, and she was highlighting about a lot of the education facilities in South Africa being privatised. Jabu had recently stood as an independent socialist councillor in Oxford, in the United Kingdom, and she explained the need to do that in order to keep offering people a socialist alternative, and that's why she stood as an independent socialist. So again, Jabu, with her opening comment, just reiterated what's already been said in this meeting, that globally there's a need for the left, mass left parties across the world to counteract what is happening. Jabu also gave some personal experience, which is, I think, another theme it would be great if this meeting can explore. But she talked about a first-hand experience while she was canvassing earlier this year and canvassing in last year's general election, about how a lot of people on the doorsteps, how their attitudes and how some of the things are saying is starting to mirror the far-right racist and scapegoating propaganda that is constantly put forward through the mainstream media and other sources in the United Kingdom at the moment. And she talked about how difficult it was for a black woman to knock on doors sometimes, and people talking in the way that people were talking. The speaker after Jabu was Audrey White, and again, I think many of you will know of Audrey, with a decades tradition of struggle going back to the 80s, when she and other people first made a stand against some, well, she said in an interview, they didn't even have the sort of language to use then. It was sexual discrimination at work. And as a result of solidarity, secondary picketing, legislation in the UK was actually introduced against sexual discrimination in the workplace. Now, Audrey's currently an activist in the Merseyside Pensioners Association, and I think, again, I suspect everyone on this call will have seen Audrey when she challenged Keir Starmer in a cafe in Liverpool and really said what many of us thought about the way he betrayed ordinary people and lied himself into leadership. Has everybody seen that short video in the past?
Yeah.
Yeah. So again, Audrey really set the scene about how Starmer's Labour government, again, is just absolutely turning on ordinary people, and how across many communities now across the United Kingdom, a government that was only voted in last year, not even a year yet, is detested in so many communities. And I think Audrey also touched upon one of the areas that was used to undermine the Labour Party when Jeremy Corbyn was the leader, and she talked about the weaponisation of anti-Semitism, and she spoke about the importance of challenging that, standing up against that and fighting those vile false accusations. And Audrey herself was an example of that, where again she actually successfully sued a magazine that made false allegations of anti-Semitism against her. And I believe in right in saying that Audrey's long campaign against that resulted in one of the longest retractions from a journal in the history of the UK media. So well done, Audrey, for that. Audrey also mentioned and touched upon what's happening at the moment, where there's a person, Zach, I forget his surname, who's standing for leadership of the Green Party and making out that there's going to be some left-wing alternative that people can go to in the absence of a left party at the moment. And Audrey pointed out that the Greens have no base in the working class, and she talked about how that is not the way forward. And Audrey also mentioned the importance of supporting the bin workers who are currently on strike in Birmingham fighting against the Labour Council, and pointed out that if the pay and conditions are cut to the measure that's the Labour Control Council are trying to do there, and that's a worrying sign for people that are working with the local authorities across the United Kingdom. So that was sort of Audrey's key points. There was also Ian Hobson that spoke from the Bakers, Food and Allied Workers Union. Although they're a relatively small trade union, it's a trade union with a long tradition in the labour movement, and it's a union that I think, to use the saying, punches above its weight. It is very good at putting forward the basic ideas of socialism, solidarity and unity, but it tends to do it in a way that I think is using language that can relate to a lot of young people as well. I think its way of communicating is very good. And just a few years ago, it managed to have a big influence on people that were working in McDonald's across the UK when they were campaigning for a living wage. So Ian, again, talked about the danger of reform. He cited the recent study that had been done, where apparently some 24 to 25% of trade union members were starting to indicate that they might give their vote to reform. And Ian pointed out very clearly that one of the things that's been really noticeable about reform over the last couple of months are doing what fascists did in Germany in the 1930s. They're trying now to use some of the language of working class people, and they're trying to tag on to some of the issues that working class people face, whether it's the closure of steelworks or restoring the payments for pensioners. So they're very deliberately using that tactic where they're trying to key in on working class issues. And as we know from looking at history, that if reform ever did come to power, then they'd very, very quickly forget about that. Ian also mentioned, obviously as a trade unionist, he was really putting a appeal out that trade unions and trade unionists must really move away from Labour. There's a danger that if they remain allied to Labour and they remain to fund Labour, that they're going to be seen as part of Labour, and they are indeed going to be seen as part of the problem, not the solution, which was one of the reasons he was saying, you know, we really need to break away, trade unions need to break away from Labour and invest the time and energy in supporting a party that's going to support ordinary working people. A little theme that Ian touched upon as well, in terms of specifics, and it's something I'll come on to a moment, in terms of what we want this new party to look like and what we want the new party to operate on. Ian made the point that in the past, when you look at the model of the Labour Party, the block vote is something that's undemocratic and is something that has been used to manipulate conferences over the decades. And Ian was saying that, you know, with the new party, we've got to look at ways of making sure that that doesn't happen again, with the block vote, not having a block vote being one example of that. Another speaker from the south of England was a speaker, Joe Gill, from the Brighton area. And Joe, some of you may have read some of Joe's articles already. Joe's a journalist, occasionally writing for the Morning Star and the Middle Eastern Eye. And Joe's involved in what's called a group called Collective Action in Brighton. And again, Joe gave an overview, the world context, about the possibility that we could be facing some very serious global conflict in the years ahead, unless we can turn the political situation around. And he just emphasised, again, as illustrated by Keir Starmer's recent speech, that capital's now decided that war is the best way to restore profitability. And again, with the calls we've seen about increasing arms expenditure right across Europe. He also emphasised, again, how there's another side to that, though, because there's now thousands, millions of people where the hypocrisy, the complete exposure that the West, inverted commas, does not care about human life and fairness and decency, when you contrast the way Western leaders speak about Ukraine and the way Western leaders speak about the genocide that's happening in Gaza, and pointing out that people are starting to realise now and see through the hypocrisy of the Western leaders. And Joe again emphasised that we desperately need a new party, a mass party that's going to represent ordinary people and stand up for peace, liberation. And again, Joe absolutely emphasised the international nature of that. Joe also mentioned a very good article that I've only just read today that he's written. It's an article Joe's written called 6 Ways That They Lied to You About Immigration. And it's a useful resource for having some information to counteract some of the racism and scapegoating on the doorsteps that we're starting to hear across the UK. Joe did also suggest some elements that would be useful to have in this new party. And I'm going to come back to Joe's suggestions later on when I mention some other contributions. Am I doing all right for time, Chair?
Yeah, just keep going, Eric. I'll remind you again in about 5 minutes.
Thank you. Another speaker was Ross Mackenzie from Edinburgh, Scotland. And Ross is a councillor that's resigned from the Labour Party, and again now standing as a socialist councillor and supporting the appeal for a new mass workers' party. Ross gave us some really interesting information about the situation in Scotland. He was highlighting, for example, that the Green Party are actually different in Scotland to what they are in the UK, and have a slightly different platform to the Green Party in England. And he explained how they are actively involved in the campaign, standing with solidarity with Palestinians, and they're doing quite a lot of work in terms of improving the rights for tenants in Scotland. But he did highlight that, again, they're not a party, they're a party that's committed to tweaking capitalism as opposed to replacing capitalism with socialism. So again, Ros was pointing out that ultimately the Greens in Scotland aren't going to have an answer. He also pointed out how the political situation is slightly different in Scotland in terms of the dynamic with the SNP and the fact that we've got PR as well in Scotland. But again, even though there is the elections in Scotland last year for the Hungary, what Ros pointed out was they desperately need a left party there for the same reasons we do across the rest of the UK. And he highlighted again, which is a theme I hope we can touch on this meeting, how the propaganda that's been put out in support of reform and other far-right groups in the UK, which is echoed by the BBC, it's on every newspaper, and it's flooded with social media, is those racist messages are now starting to be echoed by people in the community. And Ros, during his contribution, cited in his community where a janitor in a building he was doing a surgery in was using language in front of a group of people, some of the worst racist language he's heard in his life, that just a few months ago would have been unthinkable, really, to hear in public. And I think that brings us on now to Ken Loach. Now, Ken, again, I'm sure needs no introduction. Ken's contribution really, again, was absolutely reiterating the need for a new mass workers' party. And I think one of the key things that Ken mentioned within that, there was obviously the discussion, the touch upon how the new party has got to have a bold socialist programme and the new party's got to be democratic. But Ken also picked up on this change in the outlook of a lot of people across the United Kingdom, and how we've got to challenge the narrative of the far right that's just permeating across so much of the society in the UK now, where people are falling for the divisive scapegoating. To give some context to it, to what Ken was saying, and I hope other people can contribute as well when we get onto the discussion. I'm currently one of the people that's canvassing for a by-election on a large working class estate in the north of England. It's an estate called Eastfield. Population, only a small suburb. It is called a town, but it's only got a population of 7,000 people. It's 5 miles up the road from me, and I canvassed hundreds of houses on that estate 2 years ago when we were campaigning for a socialist that resigned from the Labour Party, and he also resigned as a councillor and stood as an independent socialist on that estate. And during that election, the independent socialist, a chap called Tony Randerson, won that by-election. He got 499 votes. Labour came third with 169 votes. But the far right candidate in that election actually only got 39 votes, total of 39 votes. If you go fast forward now, sorry, one more thing before I go fast forward. While canvassing on that estate, I can only remember having knocked on hundreds of doors and having lots of conversations. I can only remember one person on the estate when we said to them, what are the issues? What do you think? There was only one person that said immigration. I only met one person in the entire campaign. Fast forward 2 years, and every street I've gone on now People are coming to the door and they're repeating the racist propaganda, and they seem to think that immigration, or as they term the word, illegal immigration, the news in Britain is just constant pushing that narrative. I remember, for example, waking up on New Year's Day with a clear head, but putting the news on, and the BBC headlines at 1 o'clock that day, the headline was a record number of people have come to Britain in boats over Christmas. The headlines could have been about food prices have gone up again. The headlines could have been about the record numbers of people using food banks. The headlines could have been about the increase in ambulance response times that resulting in people dying. But the BBC chose to focus on immigration. So that is starting to have an impact now, which illustrates the absolute need to have a new party that's going to be offering an alternative narrative. Because at the moment, we've got reform in that narrative over, we've got the media putting that narrative over, and then we've also got the leader of the Labour Party putting forward that narrative over. So we know when we look at what happened when UKIP rose, when Jeremy Corbyn became leader of the Labour Party, and he offered the programme that was offered by the For the Many network, that support for then UKIP to a large extent dissipated. So that's where we are there. My final comments, and apologies, comrades, if I've gone over time. The final thing I want to share with the meeting, and it'll be interesting to get your views on, is moving away now from the threat of reform and how we counteract and pull the rug from under the feet of the racist and the far right arguments that unfortunately a lot of people are starting to absorb, is what do we want the new party to look like in the UK? What do we want the new Mass Workers' Party to look like? And I think I'll quickly share with you some of the questions that I asked during my short contribution to the Campaign for a Mass Workers' Party meeting. There were things like do we want the new Mass Workers' Party to be committed to socialism from the outset? Well, I think that's a loaded question with comrades on this call. But we did point out that when the Labour Party was formed, it was a compromise from the beginning, where people like the SDF argued that it should have a socialist programme. Unfortunately, their argument wasn't accepted, and the focus, when the Labour Party was created, was on getting representation in Parliament. So I think we're going to be going through that argument again.
Eric, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but can you draw your remarks to a conclusion just to allow...
Absolutely, Chair.
Yeah, okay.
I think very, very, very quickly, comrades, because I know we've got some very experienced people on the call. We were talking about what do we want the new party to look like. We were talking about how do we elect the councillors and MPs that we want to stand on our behalf. Should they keep all of the £94,000 salary that they're on, or should they make a contribution back to the party? How do we decide policy? And how do we make sure our meetings are inclusive? And it was also talking about the model we'd use, such as would we want a model broadly based on democratic centralism, where we have a full discussion within the party, but then when decisions are made, we go out and all sing from the same song sheet. I'll leave it there, Chair, and apologies for going over. If people have any questions about some of the more questions we asked, I'll answer them. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Eric, for a very wide-ranging, very comprehensive opening contribution. And there's lots and lots of issues there that comrades can take up in the discussion. So thanks again for the wide-ranging and informative opening contribution. Now, if comrades wish to speak, can they indicate with the electronic raise your hand, and I'll see you here then on the screen. So comrades who want to speak, please indicate. the earlier you speak, the more time there's going to be to develop the points in the discussion. So nobody has indicated yet. Right, Timos, followed by Norma.
Well, I think it's a very challenging time we are facing, and I think Eric's opening really puts the questions that should be faced and answered. I remember all my life I have been involved in politics. This question of how to build a mass workers' party was the main question that was discussed. And well, almost half a century later, we are nowhere near that, although the need for a mass workers' party is much clearer than it ever was, much more pressing. Describing what the parties of the left are and how they lack the possibility of facing the situation is easy and it's clear, and nobody, I think, is into doubt that they are not capable of bringing something forward. But on the other hand, I think approaching this question only from this viewpoint, it runs the risk of creating a feeling that we should build another party that should have the right perspectives, but work on within the same constraints that the other parties left. I think we should be starting with what are we expecting the conflicts of the next period to be? What revolution will look like? Because this is important to understand what our job will be in that. And if in what I believe, and I think that it's supported by a number of comrades here, what they wrote and what they discussed before, we don't have much time, and we have really quick events following with revolutionary aspects in them. We don't have the time to build a party with the tempo that the Labour Party was built or the socialist parties of the past were built. We'll face some sort of risings, some sort of revolutionary events like the Arab Spring, like the Yellow Vests, like Black Lives Matter, like all these mass movements that were just explosions. Some of them found political expression, and some of them also got to power, like Syriza, for example, or in various countries in the Arab Spring. But then they faded because they didn't manage to turn these events into stable gains for the working class. So I am a bit worried that these attempts might lead just to an attempt to create another electoral machine that is going to try to win elections. That's not going to be enough. I think we should make sure that we have a party that will fight electoral battles whenever it can do that. But mainly, it will have to be built specifically at the grassroots. It has to build forces at the constituencies. It will have to have offices at the constituencies and places where people can meet and discuss and manage to go forward. To do that, it has to be open in the sense that it will not be a strictly Marxist party, of a strictly Marxist-Leninist party. It has to be, to use a very misused phrase, a broad church. But there, we should make sure that people can propose and fight for programs that are revolutionary, that can be discussed and can be promoted, so that when revolutionary events happen, there will be possibilities to intervene. I have heard a lot of times about the British electoral system. That is not good for new parties. It's very difficult. Personally, I'm not convinced by this argument. I think actually it's probably the best system that a new party of this sort can be built and survive, because it can fight elections where it is strong, and it can also support in other constituencies whatever is best as a tactical move, because the working class is always very reluctant to break the unity of the class. This party, the broad church, as I see it, that has to be built, has to campaign on a platform of the unity of the left. It will not stop criticizing Starmer. It will not stop criticizing the Labour Party. It will not stop criticizing with all its force whatever it believes that is not good. It will not refrain from fighting elections if there is something to be gained in these elections. But we shouldn't make it just a complete break with the other left forces and just become another sect very quickly.
Thank you, Themos. Our next speaker is Norma.
Hello, thank you very much, Eric. Thank you very much, Themos and Finn and Roger for all the contributions. I think perhaps in some of the previous contributions, I think we need to keep open, and I need to introduce here some points which I think are important for the global situation, I mean, in particular in Britain, but which have common points with other regions of the world, and in particular Europe, and which are common with what Wynne have manifested in some writings or manifest recently. I thank Eric for the precise reports, I mean, of the different events or people who, or the meeting you participated. I think that we need to make a perspective, and in which concern Britain. I cannot avoid myself to think in what, because we see right far is searching, we said, but in fact is researching, and cannot avoid myself to think in Mrs. Thatcher, Iron Lady, and the 3 mandates, the 3 elections she won, and what she made, and what you irritated from all that, and which are the lessons we need to take from that, in particular in Britain. And in this, and I mean, and the influence had in France, for instance, when we were in a period in which it was not the right far, now it was said the socialist period at the government, And so what are the lessons? In Shasta said some lines. We need to say a summary for the new people who are reaching these new struggles in different regions, in different countries. We said economic depression, but this economic depression do not touch all people in the same way. We see also a concentration and an inequality in the distribution of the benefits of the economy. And so I think the working class, in particular the workers, need to, the trade unions, need a party, but this cannot be cannot be the traditional one with traditional set. I mean, what is the, the traditional or the old one? Because there are new things in the game, in the situation, and we discuss it here. So reorganizing, taking into account the new part of society are bringing in these struggles, or in this. I mean, I just say that putting people in the street and making struggles is not enough. With that, because we need a leadership, we need a organization, a perspective, and also be prepared that these struggles, which have been a common point in many of the regions or on the country recently, is repression of the way in which these are contrasted by the power, even in the democracies and so on. And so I think that we need to introduce, I would like to say, I mean, we have the experience of Mrs. Thatcher in the Britain. We have the experience in Europe, right far is researching or searching different ways. History is cyclic, but not in the same way, I said. Cyclic, said. Somewhere history repeats, but not in the same way, of course. And so this, I don't think it's just, I mean, the task we have is not just a task in the same way we were analyzing, which is, of course, is necessary to keep in mind. But we need to face the new situation, as I said, and taking, not forgetting the experience from the past. And I think the example of Mrs. Thatcher in Britain came to us now to see what we irritated from that, how this is as researching, how it's taking example in different countries from there, and so on. Even, I mean, the Trump, with the different mixing and characteristic of the regions and of the period. But I think it's an important point, in my view, to be introduced in the discussion today. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Norma. The next comrade who indicated a wish to speak is Matthew, and he will be followed in by Roger. Okay, Matthew.
Hi, comrades. Yeah, thanks to Eric for the introduction. I mean, this is really a key point, I think, in terms of political development in Britain. I mean, the thing is, obviously, there is this desperate need, and people can see it for a new party. Given the nature of what's happening and the decay of the Labour Party in particular, but also just generally of the political situation, given the actual decay of bourgeois democracy and the whole questions of recession and the decline of capitalism itself. So in those terms, it poses that question. Now, I mean, there then becomes, as people start to turn up a whole series of questions, is such an organization democratic? In what way is it democratic? Subsequent underneath that becomes a question. Well, okay, the reluctance is to set this thing up by many of the forces who are running the process. Of course, is there's no means of control. I mean, traditionally within any organization, there has been a means of control, whether that's a disciplined political tendency. And if you've got a disciplined political tendency, you can control an organization many times its size, provided it has a national network and runs itself on that basis. And I've seen that done. Or else you have a disciplined bureaucracy like the traditional bureaucracies of the Labour Party or whatever else. And again, I mean, these things are capable. If they have a proper political view of things and a discipline and so on, and organised, then they can dominate an organisation. Now that isn't present in this process. So then opens the questions up. So you're looking at, well, okay, what form of democracy is it? Is it democratic? Is it going to promote, serious political discussion on alternatives? And that's critical. I mean, the interesting thing is, of course, I mean, the history of the Corbyn movement, and those of us who followed it, was of course the degree of political confusion. That was the basic nature of it. If you looked at it politically, it was extremely confused. And there was lots of people involved, but there was no clear political standpoint or perspective and so on. And many people suggest, were coming out with all kinds of stuff. Much of it, as I say, based on particularly muddy political analyses and whatever else. But however, what was successful in the Labour Party in the Corbyn period, of course, was the stifling of any form of discussion of all of this within the left. So hence, you have an organisation like the building of an organisation like Momentum, which is designed to prevent a political discussion among the left and the clarification of anything, which is succeeded in doing. The question will be: is there a serious then, on a democratic organisation, some kind of clarification of the city of political perspectives and understanding of what's required? So there's this is going to be shall we say, an interesting process. The second question I think is important is accountability. I mean, traditionally, of course, in most of the organisations of the left and the trade unions and so on, there's been little or no accountability, deliberately designed. Obviously, the Labour Party, of course, at the very start, made sure that its elected representatives, wherever, were not accountable to any form of body of the organisation. They could do what they liked. But for clearly for political reasons, because obviously they were going to be of the right, and they were going to accommodate to the ruling class, and that's what they did. You can see this also in the trade unions. As I say, I mean, you have a full-time apparatus which is largely unaccountable to the membership and can do what it likes, and then obviously then accommodates to the ruling class, and performs a sterling job for the ruling class, in fact. So in those terms, that becomes critical. The third question, I think, which is central to this whole business, and is the issue of imperialism. I mean, the British, of course, is the original imperial hegemon, and is still a vital part of the functioning of imperialism on a world scale. And the question is, how is that to be challenged in those terms? And that, as I say, is essential. You can see, at the moment, I mean, even the question, because obviously the whole issue of the functioning of imperialism and so on has become much more central, whether that's the war in Ukraine, and the efforts, which have been led by the British, of course. I mean, this, for instance, I mean, this whole attack on Russian air bases, of course, is rumored to have been led by the British. And the British have been the lead element in actually provoking further war and actually moving towards a wider war in from Ukraine. Again, you can also see this in Palestine, where the British have been central to the actual function of the genocide. They are not, it's not been a question, they supported the thing. They've actually been central to carrying it out. So that, in those terms, the whole issue of the function of imperialism and its Britain's place in that system, it will be utterly central to this. And the question is, can that be brought out and opposed, in particular, obviously with a clear drive by the ruling class across the world towards World War III. Thanks.
Thank you, Matthew. Our next speaker is Roger.
Okay, thanks, comrades. I think the first thing we have to think about is how incredibly unstable the world situation is today. Norma mentioned the prime ministership of Thatcher. Thatcher's government lasted for 12 years. She remained prime minister for 12 years. Blair, who after a short interval followed her, was in power for 10 years. If you look at the recent period in Britain, within 8 years we had 6 prime ministers. It's unbelievable instability and turmoil, and it's in that situation that we've had this the development of almost the crushing of the essence of the Labour Party, and actually it's almost death, it's dying throes. Now that might seem to be counterintuitive, because last year Labour won a so-called landslide majority in the election. Now this landslide, it's true in parliamentary terms, and have a huge majority in Parliament. But the fact is that Labour won 20%. That's all, 20% of the registered electorate in Britain. 2/3 of the people who actually voted against Labour. That's a fact. That's something which is suppressed, because though their votes were divided between a number of different parties, including the Tories and Reform and the Scottish Nationalists and the Lib Dems and the Greens and so on. But the fact is that Labour already had a very, very, very shaky hold on power when Starmer came to power just a year ago. And the fact is that now Labour is completely on the point of extinction. Finn talked about the Labour Party in Ireland with 4 to 6% of the electorate. Now it's true, Labour in Ireland has never had the same mass base that it used to have in Britain, but nevertheless we could see the same thing in Britain soon, because people are deserting Labour in droves, and that's the situation. Eric quoted a phrase that I used, that like nature, politics too abhors a vacuum. Now, by default, the vacuum for the moment is being filled by reform, and we see that's something which we see a counterpart in so many countries almost around the world now. We see not just Trump in the USA, and most of the countries of Europe now, including Scandinavia with its strong social democratic traditions, including Italy, where the only mass communist party in Western Europe has been completely wiped out. But even we see the very near threat of the National Rally coming to power in France, of the AfD, perhaps in coalition, coming to power in Germany, and so on. It's a very, very dangerous situation. But the vacuum has to be filled, and it's absolutely our duty to ensure that it's filled now by left parties. And the battle is not over. This is the beginning of a period of turmoil. It's not the end of a period. We're at the beginning of completely unstable upheavals. And I want to say also, I agree very much with what Themos said about the nature of a new party when it comes into being. It's not just a question of fighting elections. As a matter of fact, on a smaller scale, I don't want to make some sectarian digs at other groups, but we have to say that if you want a supreme example of how not to develop the basis for a new party, look at what the Socialist Party has been doing in Britain with Tusk, the Trade Union and Socialist Coalition. For 25 years now, they've been standing candidates in elections, and all of them have bombed. None of them have gained the mass base, even though it was depended on active socialists, active trade union militants, and so on. And I think the reason for that is precisely because they just popped up at election time, and they didn't develop the base in the community in the meantime. So a new party will have to do that. A new party will have to be not just an election fighting party, it will have to be standing day by day on the picket lines, standing to defend tenants threatened with unjust evictions, rent strikes, protests against police violence, and so on. Those are all the kind of things, apart from climate change and Palestine protests and general mass strikes against the cuts in living standards and all this. It has to be involved day by day in a campaign to mobilise the entire community, and not just think it's a question of ticking boxes once every 5 years or whatever it might be. So I think we are about to see big changes politically. This, as I say, it's a period of intense turmoil, and yes, so far the far right seems to be reaping the benefits. But there's also going to be big movements and struggles and swings to the left too, and we have to be involved in that to the fullest possible extent. And I think we are going to see the announcement. I think actually in a few days we're going to see some kind of announcement from the traditional left, if you like, that they are going to take at least some steps towards developing a new party. Now, whether that will be the kind of party that is needed, whether it be the kind of party that I've just tried to describe, or whether it'll be simply a kind of half-hearted kind of gesture towards the standing of candidates in elections now and again, that we still have to see. But I think the enthusiasm that was shown at the meeting, 180 people attended the meeting that really was called on our initiative. I think that really shows the possibilities and the potential that is there. And I think we can look forward with a lot of hope that our efforts are going to materialise in something which is going to transform the situation in Britain, as well as in all the other countries where similar developments are taking place.
Thank you, Roger. Do any other comrades wish to speak at this point? Yes.
Dominic.
Is it? Norma, you wanted to come in again?
If it's possible, or
Yes, go ahead.
if there are other comrades who
Yes.
have not spoken before I leave the place, but if not, just a brief comment. Thank Roger for all these points and clarifications.
Got me on. I can't do it electronically.
Of course, I have in mind, of course, and I have not forget that the instability, the unstable situation we have, and that the stable, I mean, re-elected Thatcher, for instance, or others in Britain and in other countries. But nevertheless, I mean, we have common points today with those situations, and one of the points also I want to stress, which retaken, Roger, what you said, is the following: about the parties or the organization who will take, the participation in the elections and so on, which is an important point, or the party need to be there also all the time, not only make a work in the, for elections or for some particular event or for some particular struggle appear. It needed a continuous work, and in particular, the work on the working class and on the workers, because what I can say from France, from Argentina too, but with other comments, but what I can say from France is that one of the points more recently popular workers and the classes more precarious said have blamed or have criticized to the Mélenchon, or I don't want to put names, but you mentioned, some of the previous comrades have mentioned, different left, is that they appeared for the elections and for what is called societal societal causes. Societal, say, the climate or the different kinds of new causes, but not in the working and for the workers, and that is why also Marine Le Pen, the far right, said with a different, more modern surface, have recuperated the votes from the old, traditionally left workers. And that is I am not making interpretation. These are real facts. So what you said, Roger, that a party, a movement, we need to be constructed. It need to keep with the reality today, and in the workers and and trade union. When I say trade union, I am not talking about bureaucratics and so on. In France, there are important trade unions, and the people from there, from the basis, criticize the left parties that have not taken the real situation of them, and but are always discussing what is happening, which is important, what is happening in what is called the societal points, and the wars in some country and so on. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Norma. I might just add there's been publicity recently of a strike by French dockers in a port close to Marseille, which the CGT supports in terms of their policy.
Very important strike, very important position. And I must say that CGT is one of the, also sued, but is minority. CGT is very important trade union in France who have evolved and make it more real, and even in scientists. I can speak from myself. In the scientific world, CGT and not the old trade unions of scientists or teachers, is CGT with all the categories incorporated and discussing the problems which made today the more important contribution, and also in the adhesions. So Thank you, Finn, for having making this point. And this was in particular because this is very recent, and also because the first, which was last week, the first strike, the dirigents were arrested. There was a movement for that of the dockers. Then it was liberated, and then the dockers make again the strike and the refusal to charge the arms and so on because of the Gaza conflict. Thank you very much.
Yeah, it's worth noting that if workers across the globe took action in the airports, in the ports, and refused to transport weaponry such as the dockers in Marseille are doing, then Netanyahu's war would collapse. Now, the next speaker, I think, is Dominic. There's a very unclear picture of you on the screen here, Dominic. Did you indicate you wanted to speak?
Jack had his hand up too, yeah. Sorry.
Dominic? Can you hear me?
Yes, yes.
Yeah, go ahead. Your picture is very unclear, but speak.
I know. I don't know what's wrong with it.
Yeah, but you can talk. We can hear you speaking. Yeah.
I just wanted to make a few points. I think the point to my mind is you've got to say, well, you've got to sit back and say, well, what's this party going to do? What's it all about? And I think the basic thing you've got to look at, to my mind, is that everywhere you look in the world, whether it's climate change, environmental destruction, financial crisis, the fact that people are homeless, have food banks, they've not enough to eat, people are starving in a lot of countries in this world, in Somalia, in Gaza, in the Yemen, and many others. And yet the world have got people who have billions, if not trillions, of dollars or pounds, whatever they're counting it in, which is unimaginable figures as far as we're concerned. And the only way they've established all that funds is out of the work of the working class over a whole period, and today as well. And I think when you look at that, the whole question is the party has got to be an anti-capitalist party and not compromising because somebody says that will get you more votes or get you more this or get you more that. It's absolute nonsense. You get votes by explaining the truth to people. You're not just standing as a parliamentarian, you're standing as a worker, representing your class. And I think that's the basis we've got to work that we want it on. And on that sort of basis, you've got to start saying, well, what sort of things are you going to fight for? All the things I've just talked about. And the idea of having a structure where parliamentarians or whatever form they take as elected representatives are separate from the party, are not under the control of the party, are not integrated into the party and don't feel themselves part of it, which, let's face it, most parliamentary Labour Party MPs have got nothing to do with the Labour Party locally. They turn up when elections are due and things like that. So we've got to learn the lesson that that's not what we want. And that's got to be done, to my mind, in a democratic way. And the only democratic structure I can think of is one where you've got elected bodies that send delegates to higher bodies and have the right of recall, which is an old obvious thing that we say, the right of recall and the right of election, combining the two. And I think that's, to my mind, what you've got to base your structure and your policies on. I've forgotten the speaker's name, but as he said, when he went round campaigning a couple of years ago, you could argue against the propaganda that the capitalists were putting out, particularly on emigration, on racism. If you were doing that on a local basis regularly with enough forces, you could combat to a degree what these people are saying. But if you've got a party, it should have a paper that speaks for the working class and puts forward the arguments against the capitalists, because there's no voice in Britain now speaking against racism in a parliamentary sense. Starmer has hammered the point home that he supports it. So those are the sort of ideas. I don't know they come over very clearly, but those are the ideas I would think you'd be looking at campaigning for. And the biggest threat is the one of watering down policies, because, you know, there will be people who will argue that you've got to cater to the capitalists in a sense. And I think that is something we've got to really hammer home.
Thank you, Dominic. Jack, you wanted to speak?
Yes. So I have something to say about the discussion that's preceded, but I want to begin by letting people know, if you don't know, that what's going on now in Los Angeles is there have been 2 days, and there may be a third, of mass demonstrations and conflict around the ICE, the immigration Gestapo, seizing various immigrants for deportation. And there have been mass demonstrations with a large number of law and order, police and others called out, and they've been using tear gas and other forms of gas, beatings and arrests reminiscent of things that I saw and was part of, having done in the 60s. It seems like from out of the old anti-war movement of confrontations with the police. But there are new elements to this, which I think are relevant to the current discussion. Trump has the National Guard in the U.S. Reports to the governors of each state. Trump has overridden that for California and taken direct charge of the California National Guard and ordered 2,000 National Guard into Los Angeles. Now, Trump claims that the National Guard yesterday decisively routed the demonstrators, but the National Guard haven't arrived yet in Los Angeles, as even the Democratic governor and Democratic mayor Karen Bass of Los Angeles have said. Pete Hegseth, what can you say, the former Special Forces and then Fox newscaster, has said that he may send U.S. Marines in. Now, this is a major step to have, which is something we've been afraid of. We're having troops coming in, having the Trump administration using the military now against demonstrators. They tried to do this in Trump's first term, and there was pushback from all levels, and there was fear of mutiny, and they had to pull back. Now that could happen again. Okay, so so I want to inform people about it because this is an important development and it's going to be ongoing, and it illustrates a difference, a major difference between today and the past. I agree with what Roger said about, this being a very different period and a much more unstable period. In this country, there's a huge difference between what we see now with Trump and anything that came before. Nixon was considered about the most openly, corrupt and dishonest president in recent history. But there's nothing that compares to Trump. We're in a very different situation. When Nixon was confronted by congressional Republicans saying you need to resign because because your crimes are too great for us to back. There's nothing that compares to that now. Trump is openly openly ripping off the country and the world and acting like a mob boss who rules the world, except for possibly, backing down before Putin and maybe Xi. So we're in a much different situation. There's virtually no opposition to him in in Congress, and as far as the as far as the big capitalists are concerned, even those like many of the Wall Street people, they only stand up when the bond market threatens to collapse. And Trump will act then because, for one thing, Trump is heavily invested in bonds himself. But among other reasons, such as if the bond market were to collapse, that's the lifeblood of the world economy. So, and that point, even gets through to Trump. So, but aside from that, all of the actions that he's been doing, the absolute, the attacks on the immigrants, basically making it clear that anyone who stands up and opposes, they will be come down on in an extremely vicious way, which we're seeing in Los Angeles now. No opposition is tolerated. No such thing as free speech to him, although the Republicans claim, that everyone else is violating their free speech. And the campaign against anti-Semitism is, of course, going to turn into and is turning into its opposite. So we're in a very different and dangerous situation. But in the U.S., and as regards to third parties, the third party attempts recently in the U.S., and by recently I mean over the past 75 years, 75, 80 years, have not been working class or labor-based parties. There was the Peace and Freedom Party, which was the most significant one in the anti-war movement, and the Peace and Freedom Party was based on the anti-war movement, not on a working class party, and it's now a basically small sect, and the Green Party is never achieved what the Peace and Freedom Party did in terms of visibility and influence, but it's now even more fragmented, and again, nothing like based on the working class. So I think that, and I'm not going to comment more on the situation in Britain because I don't know it like as well as you people do, but I do know that I believe that you have to have a party that's based on the working class to the degree possible, trade unions, and I agree with what Dominic said about the need for it to be as much as possible explicitly anti-capitalist. So that's I don't want to go much further. I do want to say one thing though, which is that we have a real situation in the U.S. where the question I've argued that this isn't fascism. I don't think it is, but I do think that there's an analogy with what happened in Germany when Hitler took over, which is that at that time, the Junkers and the others and German leaders, capitalists, believed that he'd be used. They could use him against the Communist Party, the Socialist Party, and the trade unions, wipe them out, and then get rid of him in 1 to 2 years. That didn't happen. There's something similar that's going on with Trump, I believe. I think it's very dangerous, and to take it on is going to require not just the kind of party based on what I said, but it's going to require a direct combat, confrontations against these forces. They're going to have to be taken on because they will not confine themselves to a political arena. I'm going to stop there.
Thank you, Jack. As no other comrades have indicated the desire to speak,
Yes.
ask Eric to summarize the discussion.
Oh,
John,
With assembly, Dominic is
sorry,
okay.
yeah, John, can I just say a few
John.
words?
Yes, go
And
ahead, John.
that is with regard to America. While on the one hand, we've had the demonstrations in Los Angeles, against the deportation of so-called migrants, many of whom were born in America. the other side of it, there was a report that now there's a big backlash against some of the cuts that were brought in by Elon Musk, particularly in the area of veterans affairs. There's been demonstrations of veterans that highlight the cuts to their Medicare, cuts to their pensions, etc., because the vast majority of people employed in that area were themselves veterans. And, you know, it just shows that they've not thought things out. They've just come in with a big chainsaw, cut thousands and thousands of jobs. Equally in Britain, what Starmer has done has alienated one of what I feel is one of the backbones of Labour support electorally, and that is he's seriously alienated the Muslim community. The Muslim community doesn't represent a big percentage of the British population, but what it does represent is pockets that are almost entirely Muslim. Some of them are in the towns in the north, areas of Manchester, areas of Bradford, areas of Leeds, etc., and areas of East London. And in that sense, you know, what has been said about the fact that Labour had one of its biggest majority in history with a falling vote indicates, if you like, the weird setup of the last election. And come the next election, there will be many, many people who have got long memories, not just pensioners on the winter fuel allowance, but a large, I mean, at the last election, I forget how many, but there was at least 3 or 4, if not 5 or 6 MPs directly elected on the war in Gaza and the fact that Labour did not stand up for the Palestinians. You know, it did not have, if you like, even an even-handed approach to Palestine. That the whole nonsense that Israel has a right to defend itself, it's like saying that some Rocky Balboa has a right to defend itself against a group of small, you know, families that have no, if you like, serious arms or no serious means of defending themselves and getting the hell battered out of them by the Israelis. So from that point of view, I think in America, I think you're going to get a backlash in terms of the welfare, particularly welfare that veterans get, but also I think welfare in the broadest sense. And I think as far as Britain is concerned, there is a growing resentment that Keir Starmer has a dictatorial attitude when in reality he's skating on very thin ice. So I'll leave it at that, comrades.
Thank
Can
you,
I
John.
say something about that? Just about the very, very quickly about the veterans.
Can you be brief, Jack? Because we're trying to draw the meeting to a conclusion.
Let me go no more than 2 minutes, okay? Stop me after 2 minutes if I'm any longer than that.
Yeah, go ahead.
There's no question that veterans are upset, and this has been the case for months now, and it's the case in many other areas. It's not rocket science to say that there's going to be widespread opposition. But I don't agree that they don't know what they're doing. I think they do know what they're doing more than we think. That's why they're flooding the zone. They're trying to get facts on the ground, facts accompli, and to use force to discourage all opposition. And the question is, will they be able to do that? There's been a lag in reaction. People have been willing to give Trump, his voters, the quote-unquote benefit of the doubt for some time. That's starting to end. It will certainly end among many. There's a hardcore, though, of 20 or 30 million who will stay with him no matter what. I'm not going to go further, but we can talk about, Christian nationalism, and support for a theological republic, which has mass support in this country, and other factors which he relies on. He didn't pardon the Oath Keepers and the Proud Boys thugs for no reason. And people should be aware You know, this is not going to be a walk in the park, and the opposition is certainly going to come. What will happen in the 2026 elections? Will those be, we know what Trump will say when they lose, because they will lose the House of Representatives in anything that resembles even a U.S. traditional, quote unquote, fair election. I'll stop there.
Thank you, Jack. Eric, in your summing up, can you maybe confine yourself to maybe 5 minutes or thereabouts?
Absolutely, Chair.
Okay, off you go then, Eric. And thanks again for your opening contribution.
Thank you, Chair. I think, first of all, comrades, thanks very much for letting me have the opportunity to open the debate today. The key thing I did miss off was I forgot to mention Matthew, who also stood in to chair Tuesday's meeting. And behind the scenes, it was Matthew that ensured people could speak from the floor, and the contributions from the floor are going to be put online soon. And it was also Matthew that gave a much shorter summary of the meeting than what I managed to do. So I'd like to thank Matthew. I think very quickly, comrades, going back to the points that Norma and Themos made, I think absolutely the new party has got to be based in the community. It's got to address the issues faced by the community, and it's got to be standing with people that are struggling, whether it's trade unionists on the picket line or, as Roger said earlier, whether it's people that are engaged in trying to make sure the homes they're living are fit for purpose, or rent strikes, etc. So absolutely. I think, going to Dominic's point, I hope the new party will be very much based on an anti-capitalist footing and offering a socialist programme. So from day one, we don't have that internal argument that was in the Labour Party from its inception about what is it we're actually trying to do. And we definitely need not to allow a clique of MPs to develop that have no resemblance to the party that put them there. And we need to absolutely try and ensure have some way of recall as well. Going to Jack's point, I'd like to thank Jack for the information he shared about America as well. I didn't know that Trump had actually taken over one of the National Guards in Los Angeles. I didn't actually realise that, which is quite chilling. But I think to finish off on 2 quick points, if I may, Chair, I think what we're experiencing in the UK now, it might not be fascism, but I think I'm going to word this carefully. One of the things I've always done is I've watched what our opponents are doing. So I watch GB News in Britain. That's a very pro-reform channel. I've read some of the far-right literature. I've read about what Goebbels said. And it is quite chilling how, having read what happened, for example, in Germany, how people believed propaganda and were blaming an innocent group of people for socio-economic problems that were not of their making. It is chilling to go on estates now and find that many people are today blaming innocent people for socio-economic problems that are not of their making, which is why, as Roger said, there's definitely a void and we've got to fill it. And I think, if I may, Chair, I'll finish off. What I've been doing, I've read quite a bit in my life, but unfortunately, I'm of an age where I've forgotten a lot of what I've read. So I'm having to read again. And this is one of my most treasured pamphlets. It was written in 1948, and it's called The Menace of Fascism, What It Is and How to Fight It. And it was written by a comrade called Ted Grant, who I'm sure many of you will be familiar with. And the very back of the pamphlet says, the struggle for the emancipation of the working class is not between races or religions. It is of one class against a class. Every trace of anti-Semitism or any form of race hatred cannot assist the oppressed. It can, on the contrary, only aid the exploiters. Workers of all nationality, religion or creed must stand together against a common enemy, capitalism. And I'd like to finish on that quote. Thanks, comrades.
Thank you, Eric. Jack, I see your hand is up. Is that a legacy from a previous contribution, or did you want to make some additional?
Yes,
points?
that's a legacy from a previous contribution.
Okay.
I will lower it.
Okay. So I'd like to thank Eric once again for a very informative opening contribution. And I want to thank the comrades for making the discussion a very useful and very comprehensive examination of quite a complex range of issues on a global scale. and comrades have contributed from a number of countries and have illustrated points, and which makes this type of discussion unique. Now, this discussion doesn't conclude and doesn't present resolutions to problems. It raises questions and expands our understanding of issues. So comrades should go away and consider the points that have been raised, and this way develop a fuller understanding of the kind of issues that we're being faced with on a global scale. And the purpose of Workers International Network is to create that kind of understanding that will enable us all, firstly in individual countries and ultimately on an international scale, to develop an international socialist working class movement, which is a truly mass party on a world scale. So with that, comrades, we'll conclude this meeting. Now, Roger, you may wish to add some points about the discussion we're going to have next Sunday.
Yes, comrade. I think it's been a really brilliant discussion today, and I thank all comrades who've participated. We've got a number of very interesting meetings lined up now. Next week, we're having a discussion on the situation, the very strange situation that has developed in Syria, where a former terrorist, former ISIS leader has come to power with the support of American imperialism and all its allies. And we've got Comrade Aman, an Iranian comrade who we all know, who's going to speak about that. I'd just like to draw your attention to that we've got a couple of very interesting meetings lined up beyond that. The following week, Comrade Raymond from France has been doing some work on the questions of demography. Now, the usual scare that is always used against Marxists, or one of them, is the danger of overpopulation. Raymond has been studying the question, and he says, on the contrary, the danger is underpopulation, the shrinkage of the population. And he's going to present what I think will be a really innovative and interesting lead off on that. That's in 2 weeks' time. And thirdly, I think I did draw attention to this. I said it might happen this week. It's been delayed a little bit, but we're really privileged to have a Palestinian socialist who's going to be speaking on the development of the left in the past in Palestine and what happened to it, and what the way forward is likely to be in this appalling situation that exists today. So I really welcome all the comrades to come to future meetings. Bring your own comrades along too, because I think these meetings are absolutely unique and I think all of us, certainly for myself, I've learned so much from attending them. So thanks, comrades. See you next week.
Thank you, Roger, and thank you all again for your attendance. And we look forward to seeing you.
Thanks.
Look forward to seeing you on Sunday next. So, Slán Guibgile, which is the Irish for goodbye, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.